So the idea of non-duality, the concept and the experience really is that just really we are all just one moment in time and one thing in unity, and that our experience as a human to be being separate from that is simply this we're fragments of light, perhaps, or frequency or energy that are reflections of this one eternal truth. Only when you start to take accountability for yourself, when you start to say, I am completely responsible for all of my actions in every moment, I cannot blame anyone outside of myself. Or when I choose to blame anyone outside of myself, I'm giving away my power, I'm giving away my agency, and actually what can I do right now in every moment to create my world? And the more we actually get rid of what we think is possible, the more wonderful and magical and magnificent what comes to us can actually be.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast. I'm your host, Jimmy Moses, and thank you again for tuning in. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Aaron French. Aaron is a psychic medium, Akashic reader, and spiritual practitioner, and he's been doing this for over 30 years. He also has a very deep non-dual foundation, which is rooted in Taoist teachings. Aaron, thank you so much for stopping by Shifting Dimensions. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here.
So I want to start with, just diving deep right into it. You talk about having a profound spiritual awakening in 2019. And I want to know what was the catalyst for that spiritual awakening and what were some of the things you experienced?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for that question. So just to back up from that, I had been doing some spiritual work. I had a guru for a while, and I lived with a guru in a community that ended poorly. And I had some other teachers, a Taoist teacher for many years. And still, through all of that, I learned a lot of things and had some good experiences, but also always felt like I was being limited and blocked and never quite experiencing what I knew was possible. So years go by, and in the fall of 2018, I had a separation from my wife, divorce, and then some things were going rocky with work. And then in the spring of 2019, my mom had been suffering from cancer. My mom was really having deep trouble with cancer and deep into that journey. And so I was just sort of reeling and realizing after my split and divorce and the end of 2018 that it's like, oh, I can't continue to go on like I have been in the past. It's like the way I've been living my life outwardly was really successful and inwardly felt really empty and felt really disconnected from who I truly was. And actually in the in December of 2018, I had a vision in the middle of the night. I was sort of awake really late, but I wasn't asleep. It wasn't a dream. It was a vision that came to me. And it was this voice that came to me that said, you can change your life, take responsibility. And it showed me the image of my life if I continued on like I had been living. And it sort of showed me the emptiness, and it showed me this vision, and not to be dramatic, but like the emotional impact I received was like, oh, if I live like this, I'm already dead. If I live like this, I'm not fully alive. Like, not suicidal, not any of those things, but just like I'm already living in a way that's already disconnected, and I might as well just not be here in a certain way. And it really like sort of snapped me awake in a deeper way to take control. And I started to just step into awareness in a deeper way. And really, that one line of like taking control, start owning every single part of my life. Start saying, oh, I am responsible for my experience. I am responsible for how people react to me. My energy is creating the world around me, and I'm going to step into a new phase of who I am. So that's how it sort of started. And just that surrender of saying, okay, I'm completely done with how I lived before. So during this time, things in my life were very busy and very chaotic. My mom lived a couple hours away from me, and I was going to chemo appointments with her and trying to work with caretakers and those sorts of things. And then I was a single dad with my daughter part-time, trying to be a good father. And then going through my own personal awakening and shifting of what I believed my life was all about. And there was this point in all of that when, you know, the Buddhists say, like, right, if you're on the spiritual path and you're not ready to surrender, that more suffering is required, more suffering is necessary. And I kept remembering that quote I had learned many years before. I kept remembering that and just saying, like, okay, whenever I'm feeling a blockage, just surrender more because I'm done feeling blocked and just like surrendering. And then ultimately things just opened up into dropping into my heart and expanding into connections with spirit in ways that I couldn't imagine possibly before that.
Thank you for sharing that story. There are a couple of things I want to touch on a little bit deeper. I think the first thing, which you kind of just already talked about, which is you were living a life that was no longer sustainable for you, right? And just to make sure I fully understand, you had just gone through a divorce or you were in the process of a divorce. Your mom was sick, so you were trying to manage that, going back and forth with her to doctor's appointments. And then on top of that, I think you said work was not ideal either.
Yeah, I mean, so at the time, I've had a lot of careers over my lifetime, but at the time, I had received I was a chef previously to that. I got an MBA, and so I was working as an executive in the food industry. So I was working at the time in a company that was doing good work, but frankly, the leadership of the company were people who were really just trying to extract all the profit, reduce the quality of what we were offering, try to like hide that fact, and doing some things that weren't fully aligned with my values, and then pushing me in directions to manage staff in ways that I didn't appreciate. And I was doing it. So like, I was the one that was doing all these actions, which I knew in my heart I didn't fully agree with. And I had been doing this in other jobs previously. I was always the person that was sort of in senior management and the executive level who was carrying out the directives from the CEO or the board to diminish the quality of, in the food industry of the companies I was working in. And and I was doing this for years and I would push against it at times, but still I was like, wow, this is actually misaligned with who I know I am. And when I would push against it, then there would be friction in the company. And then sometimes I would be let go in a number of cases. And sometimes I would quit myself, or other times I would just be in that role and there would be friction with my supervisors, the superiors. And I was like, okay, I need to find a way to not do this anymore. And also, Spirit had been calling me for years, and Spirit kept whispering at that point to me, you need to be more aligned with your true life path. You need to be more aligned truly with helping people and supporting people in their awakening and their journey. You have enough experience at this point. And at that time, a couple of years ago, I kept saying still like, oh, I'm not ready. It's not time for that. Not yet, kind of thing. And Spirit kept telling me, actually, no, it is time. Step up.
Wow. I think what you just shared is very powerful, right? Because at the heart of that story is you not going against your personal values and morals standards, right? And I had a guest on the show recently. We didn't necessarily talk about this, but he wrote about this and he said a lot of the suffering that happens in the world happens when people stray away from their own personal integrity. And the further they stray away from that, the more they suffer, the more they try to take things to numb themselves because they can't sit with the actions that they're taking, how they're living their life. And I think it also speaks to what you said earlier, where you said you heard a voice that basically said that if you keep living this way and doing these things, we're not talking about suicide here, but you might as well be spiritually, potentially dead, right?
I love that. And now skipping ahead, so some time has gone by and now and for a number of years now, I've been, full time being a medium Akashic reader, spiritual mentor to people and working to fully align with my spirit's purpose to support people in the awakening during this time. And as part of that, the message that I've received deeply in 2024 and still now in the beginning of 2025, like the energy of right now is one of deep alignment. And so for all of those of us who are awake even a little bit, the energy right now is to really snap into our deepest alignment. So we're being pulled along this deep awakening that's happening globally. And for all of those of us who are not and holding on to the parts of ourselves that are misaligned, it's becoming more and more painful, more and more difficult. People's lives are getting more sort of challenging when we hold on to those parts of ourselves that aren't truly and most fully aligned with our soul purpose. And I feel like this is a shift in the consciousness of this era of humanity that's happening. Whereas, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, there was a period when there was sort of a little bit more darkness in the world, and it was more okay. I'm using air quotes for those of us, who are listening just on the podcast. It's more, quote, okay, air quotes, to live a way that wasn't fully aligned because the energies of the earth weren't pushing us to wake up so strongly as they are now. And so that was, I was felt it really deeply in 2024 and before, but that was sort of coming on in a slow ramp over these previous years. And I think I was tapping into that energy of like, okay, I was doing these things trying to be a good person, but still finding myself in situations and choosing to act in ways that didn't fully align with my highest self. And then increasingly starting to choose, like, okay, no more of that. How do I? And that's been a process of unfolding. When you start to take accountability for yourself, when you start to say, I am completely responsible for all of my actions in every moment, I cannot blame anyone outside of myself. Or when I choose to blame anyone outside of myself, I'm giving away my power. I'm giving away my agency. And actually, what can I do right now in every moment to create my world? That's what we can do, right?
Yeah, and that's been a recurring message that I've been receiving as well, just from all the guests that I've been talking to and in my own personal life as well. I mean, there was a time too where I was just suffering, and every time I tried to do what was expected of me, I would suffer more, right? And then until I surrendered and started taking more aligned action, and I'm still on that journey, still have so much to learn, but life has gotten a lot easier once I started taking responsibility for myself and kind of shifting from the victim mindset and shifting into, well, this is my life. I'm the author of it. What story do I want to write? And it can be very scary to kind of jump into the deep end. And I don't think I've fully jumped into that just yet, but it is kind of scary when you have been programmed a certain way to shift that programming or have the courage to kind of step into your authentic power. So, thank you for sharing that. I think that's very important for the listeners to hear. So, as you were going through this awakening, right? And I know you've been spiritual your whole life, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that more later on. But as you were going through this awakening in 2019 into 2020, your mom was also, like you said, suffering from cancer. How did that shape the awakening process for you and how you thought about life in your life?
You know, really deeply, really powerfully, right? And for those of you who have lost your parents, from whatever tradition you believe in, like we can all feel this. Like now, and my dad passed last year, so more recently as well. And at the time, he had been dealing with dementia and on that path of dementia for many years. So he was alive during this, but not fully himself, even at the best of days. From the Taoist perspective, right, there's a strong pattern of ancestor worship, and there's a ritual for many of the Taoist traditions of having an altar, a family altar. And when your parents pass away, you literally like move everyone's pictures, everyone's talismans up the altar closer to the top rung, where then they get passed on into the void. And it's like when my mom died, I felt like the shift closer to the eternal void of all things. And that doorway to the eternal, that the veil just became so thin for me. And even watching her with the cancer, where, for her diagnosis, there was a very definite end date. There was no, as soon as we got the clear diagnosis, it was pancreatic and liver and it was spreading. And it was really clear that it wasn't around like if she could fight this. It was like, how can she live the best life she can for the number of months she has left? So it was a hard end date. And, really watching her and being with her during that time of surrendering, of surrendering and just saying, let's enjoy these moments we have all my life I've lived in these ways and I've had these thoughts, and then watching her and being with her sort of struggle with those and let those go. And finally, ultimately, when she did pass, it was a decision that she made. She was in hospice care, but had just entered hospice care, which is sort of the end of life care process. And then immediately she passed away the next day when they had said, oh, she probably has a few months. She was just like, I'm ready to go at this point. Okay, it's time. It's time to pass on. Yeah, it's a process of the veil, of seeing how precious every breath is, of seeing how thin the veil is, of seeing how delicate this process is of our souls being in our bodies and this ex chance to experience this earth every moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful experience, especially when, as you continue to wake up to this reality that we're living in, right? And you talked a lot about surrender. We've used that word a few times. We've used that word a few times now since we started talking. And I think surrender is the perfect word for describing a lot of the Taoist teachings, right? Which is my understanding of Taoism is they really teach about being in flow with the world, with nature. And something that you talk about often is non-duality. So I kind of want to jump right into that. So what is non-duality? I know that you woke up to that experience and really felt it within you in this awakening that we've been talking about. So, what is non-duality and what are the Taoist teachings connected to that?
Yeah. Beautiful question. And, the first thing to say about non-duality is it's something that doesn't lend itself to words, which is why, just to back up, right, even the first line of the Tao Te Ching, the classic Taoist text, is that the Tao that can be known is not the real Tao, is one of the translations, right? And basically saying like, okay, here's this whole book of talking about this thing called Tao. Any words we put to it are just going to point to it from different directions, but we can't really get to the truth of it because it's beyond words. Any words we put to it are going to be so limiting that it won't be true. And yet, here we go, let's talk about it, right? So the idea of non-duality, the concept and the experience really is that just really we are all just one moment in time and one thing in unity. And that our experience as a human to be being separate from that is simply this, we're fragments of light, perhaps, or frequency or energy that are reflections of this one eternal truth. And that the more we can surrender into the flow of the energy that is all things, the more we can be aligned with the one eternal truth, which is simply that all things are here. And it's really that simple. Just all things are here and this is it. And you and I and everyone else and the microphone and me and my shirt and you and everything is just one thing. Well, what does that feel like? It feels like when we're connecting in that way, it feels like the energy can flow between us because there's no barrier. So I know that you're a human and I'm a human, and yet we can open up into this energy of like, oh, we're actually connected completely, and the trees and the ground and the sky and the different realms of energy are all just right here and right now to be interacted with and to feel. And so, like, one of the mornings when I had a deep awakening during this process, like the sunshine of the sunrise, I was up really early, felt so bright and colorful and like it was laughing directly into my pores. And I just started to laugh like uncontrollably with joy of like, the laughter of the sunshine. And it wasn't laughter, that's my human interpretation, right? It's like trying to point to something, but the joy of the energy of the sun hitting each of my pores joined me with the sun's energy in a way that just like all I could do was laugh. It's this idea that just everything is okay because it's all right here and there's nothing to do or nowhere to go. This is one of the key things. It's like, I'm not fond of the word enlightenment because it sort of in the West perhaps has this view of like that there's one level of awakening and then things are different and we're all just sort of floating on clouds or something like that. And it's not like that at all. It's more like the deeper we awaken, and there's many levels perhaps of awakening that we can go through. The deeper we go into awakening, the more here everything is. And so then we still need to go through and wash the dishes and put on our clothes and go out the door and get some food. And at the same time, nothing matters at all. And we just sort of float through life and we laugh and accept and be in a way that is actually entirely different, even though it's entirely the same.
Thank you for explaining that because, when people hear non-duality, at least let me speak for myself, I hear no separation, right? But like you just kind of hinted at, we live in a 3D world where there are clear separations, right? And to your point about all is basically what you're describing or how I'm interpreting it, even though words fail to fully capture what we're talking about, is this whole essence of everything is connected, right? This oneness that people talk about often. But sometimes I feel like, how can we hold space for that knowing without feeling apathetic?
And it's around, and this is core to the Tao of this idea of yin and yang, of these opposites of energy and passivity and action and surrender and these ideas. And it's really about holding the balance simultaneously of all things in the moment. So when we're, like one beautiful example is human suffering, right? Human suffering from the human level, from my heart, when I see my friends or when I hear about communities that are going through mass suffering, I have deep compassion and sometimes I cry tears and I have all the emotions and all that. And, holding that tender compassion and even sorrow and sometimes anger and pain for those experiences of my friends and family and communities that are going through hard times, at the same time, there's a simultaneous realization that everything is unfolding and that these cycles of life have been happening beyond time that we can know, beyond for generations and generations past, and that just simply is how it is. And that in that how it isness, we can show up and just with a deeper compassion of saying, okay, here we are now in this moment. Wow, things are difficult or tough, or maybe also beautiful at the same time, or challenging. What do we do now? And then what do we do now? And then how do I react to the suffering now? And hold that space. So it's this idea of the way I experience it personally is that like it's from my heart center, and in Taoism we call it the heart wisdom. It's like there's this cone of nowness of awareness that expands out to encompass more than sort of a limited consciousness. And when we're holding more, then all the perspectives can be fully acknowledged and held, not ignored and sort of pushed aside, but acknowledged and held in the moment and honored while still allowing them to be okay, even when they're horrific, in this strange balance of acceptance.
As you were talking, something came to me. I think I just had an epiphany, and I want to see how it lands with you. When you were talking about balance, right? Where we know everything, there's oneness, right? We're in the flow of things, cycles happen, and we're all part of everything that's going on. But how do we still remain, for example, compassionate to those who are suffering and to ourselves who are suffering as well? Because we have to live in this world, right? And what I got was this idea of experience versus non-attachment, which is something that people talk about often, where we're able to experience things, emotions, experience life, experience relationships, but not be attached to our emotions surrounding it or attached to the people. Because again, somebody might ask, how could you love someone without being attached to them? But there is a way to do that. I can't explain that right now. But as you were talking, that was kind of those were the two words that popped into my mind to help me fully grasp what you're trying to say. And I don't know if I'm doing a great job explaining this right now, but again, the two words in terms of balance is experience, because we are experiencing life as we live it, basking in that experience, but not being attached to it, observing it almost.
It's 100% right. I think that's a beautiful way to talk about this. And, the attachment is when we make something important. When we talk about attachment, we're saying, oh, this experience, and it can be in either direction, oh, I have this degree from this prestigious university. I'm attached, I am this, and I make myself about that. I'm attached to that idea of myself that I'm very important or something, like whatever. And these things, or I'm attached to this person. Oh, I love them so much, and they make me feel this way, and this is very important to me, and or all the other ways that we can attach to, oh, I had this traumatic experience in my childhood where my dad, beat me, which is this is a true story. My dad beat me when I was a child with his belt, and he would tell me, he would tell me when I was little, like, "Oh, you're so lucky that I'm not beating you as bad as my dad beat me. So you should be lucky and thank me for this." Like so for a long time, like I can attach myself to that story of suffering, or I can just accept and let that attachment go and not pretend it didn't happen. And yeah, that happened, and that was my experience, and it was horrific at the time and made me go through life in my early childhood with all kinds of ways of coping with that. And also, I don't have to make my this current moment right now reflected in that. It's informed by it, it's there, it's being held, but I'm not being bound and chained by the attachment of that suffering anymore because it's just there. I can smile at that part of myself with loving, like tender, like compassion about the difficulty that I personally experienced in my youth. And at the same time, be appreciating the journey that occurred from that into this moment of the conversation right now and how that informed my journey. Yeah, the
Yeah.
attachment is really a trick because we were taught by the mind that certain things are important, and this is a new thing in I believe that came into the Western world in the last 1,000 or 2 years. So very recently, actually, last 1,000 or 2 years is very recent in the history of humanity and history of humankind where we shifted the focus from our hearts to our brains and said, oh, our brains are in control and we're going to have our brains decide what our life purpose is and what's important and not important and how we direct our lives. When in reality, the brain's job is really just to keep us safe from these extreme events. Don't get eaten by a tiger, don't get run over by a car, don't jump off a cliff. Our brain's very good at those kind of things. Our brain was never designed to decide what's important for us from a soul level. That doesn't go through our thought process. It's a different thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why there's a lot more conversations and push towards really leaning on our heart intelligence because they even said that there are brain cells in the heart as well, which I thought was extremely fascinating. So again, I think everything that we've been saying has been great, and especially what you've been saying, I should say, and just to kind of add to everything you just said, again, what comes up for me is kind of like I said, experience and then non-attachment. And I guess a further way to even define that based on the additional context you just gave is this idea of not coming up with a story attached to that experience or defining yourself by those experiences, whether good or bad, right? Because I think we define a lot of who we are by the experiences that we have. And it's important to experience things and participate in life and kind of reflect and observe how certain experiences are shaping us. And as we continue to do that, the more aware we become. But the non-attachment, the non-duality comes when we do not define ourselves by these experiences. So yeah, again, I hope
By
I don't,
anything.
yes,
Yeah,
go ahead.
when we don't define ourselves by anything, right?
Yes.
When we don't have any definition. And like I was taught from my Taoist teacher that there's 12 levels, and this is not probably true true on a deepest level, but the map I was taught was there's 12 levels of awakening. And so the first six of those levels are in duality, and then there's six more levels even within non-duality. So even in the oneness of non-duality, there still can be a deepening and expanding and a deepening and expanding, in this case, six times, which is probably an allegory for like infinite times. But regardless, in this model, I was taught six times where there are these stories of these mystics and these masters that are, just sitting on a cushion and floating or in the Himalayas in a cave and they float and they can just create food out of nothing because they're so connected to all things, right? So that would be sort of maybe the last stage of being still in human form on the earth and being connected to all things, but we can still be in non-duality and not be there. We can still have experiences of non-duality and still have to eat our own food that we go and buy or pick from the ground and not have to like manifest it out of our energy. And part of the path that my Taoist teacher taught is that as we deepen into not making a story about anything, what happens is we become more and more infused with actually the real energies of the earth, which in the Taoist system is the five elements, right? And those deep energies, as we give of what we think is true, we become the elemental forces that are creating us beneath that, right? We become the elemental forces of nature inherently. as we deepen into ourselves. Because, of course, what else are we? I mean, this is the thing. Even science, right? Of course, we're the same as everything else. We're made up of the same atoms and energy and molecules, and we exchange resources. The air I breathe came from the tree outside and back and forth. All these things. Of course, we're all connected. Science even says this. But there's a disconnect in how we interpret that in the Western world, which is falling away now that there's this deeper and deeper awakening. But right, so as we just give up our conception of what we think we are, we actually truly become what we were born to be, which is everything.
Beautiful, well said. And as you were talking again, because obviously we're on the topic about awakening and kind of shifting into the state of non-duality and oneness. And again, as I question, how do we get to that spot without feeling apathetic, right? Like nothing matters, right? And what I heard in my head was kind of like to achieve a certain level of enlightenment and to feel apathetic is sort of the ego making you believe that you have nothing else to learn.
That's right. Well, and the ego, our mind's thoughts is going to try to limit. The mind can't comprehend these levels of consciousness because they don't happen through the mind at all. So it's this place where, the first part of our journey is about learning more. We have to learn more about different states of the world to be able to step into, even like a thing right now that's really popular, how to manifest the world around you, manifestation. We have to learn those because we weren't taught those as a kid, perhaps. And then as you go deeper, though, all of a sudden there's this place where then we need to actually forget everything and let it drop away. And so there's this place where what got you here won't take you any further. And we have to sort of let that go. And this is why, for many people, and this is an optional part of the journey, you can get to these phases through meditation and through all the other spiritual practices, and also with plant medicines and things like this, where those experiences of a plant or fungus medicine can take you into these states of consciousness, which open up what's possible for you. So then when you go back into your quote real life, you realize that there's more and you can let go of things perhaps and open up into a deeper world because you've been shown what's possible.
Well, you just sparked my curiosity with something, which when you just said that, at the beginning of a lot of people's spiritual awakening or understanding the world and how they fit in the world and how to interact with the world on a spiritual level, we learn things like manifestation, for example. And then you said that when we get to a certain level of spiritual understanding or a new level of consciousness, we also have to release those things or let them go. Well, what does that mean? Why would we have to, what's the purpose in letting them go?
Right. So even just to, and this is like manifestation is one small piece of the big picture, but to use this as an analogy for the rest of how this works. So at the beginning of the manifestation journey, for example, we're like, oh, I want to manifest, more money, a fancier car, or my perfect partner, or whatever it might be, all the things that we want as humans. And then as we deepen into the process, what we realize is that actually what the universe might possibly offer us can be far greater than anything we could imagine. Because what we can imagine is actually limited by our conditioning, what's possible for us. And the more we actually get rid of what we think is possible, the more wonderful and magical and magnificent what comes to us can actually be. So in this one example, the more at first we're taught, for example, in some traditions to like write down specifically what we're looking for and do certain like intention rituals every day to read through them and say them aloud and repeat them in certain ways and energetically align with them. As we go deeper into the process, really the process is okay, I'm going to awaken and connect with the deepest love of the universe and trust that whatever comes to me is exactly what I need, which is probably far greater than anything I could imagine that I might ask for in this moment. And then what comes from there is this flow of beauty and being taken care of because we are being inherently taken care of on a level that's far beyond what we're taught. And certainly, too, I want to back up and say, like, I think that there have been in our cultures, and I do believe that there will be cultures, even our culture in the future, where we might be taught these things from an early childhood age, where then we can actually learn them and then forget them earlier because we integrate them so deeply into ourselves. And right now we're in this period of like this shifting awakening where many of us as adults are learning these tools. And so we have to learn them and then also then as we deepen forget them. So like I really love one of the things I love doing, I work with people at all levels of the spiritual journey, but I really love people coming to me at this time of like right on this boundary of non-duality where they're stepping into it and have some experiences with it, but then if we're manifesting something, for example, to use this example again, if we're manifesting something and have some strict idea, I want specifically this. Well, what is that? That's actually reinforcing this ego identity of who we are. And that's separate from actually relaxing into all things as they are, right? In this one example, you can see how when we want to manifest something specifically, we're actually going against the order of the deeper connection with the universe, which is just all things are. And we actually are connected to everything already anyway. So then whatever you need is already here for you on a deeper level.
Yeah. And I think that kind of ties into what you said earlier, which is this whole idea of alignment. And what I'm hearing, or what I'm picking up as well, is that part of the spiritual path is deep alignment. You get more and more aligned with who you are. You know thyself a lot more. You know yourself a lot more. And the more you know yourself and the more you're aligned, the things that are manifested into your life happen because you're in a flow state. You don't even need to necessarily write a list. You don't have to work on manifestation practices because you're in such alignment that the things that are aligned for you will show up for you and it will be great for you. That's also what I'm understanding from everything that you're saying.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I want to just really but go back to that term of alignment that you're using and I've been using as well. And it's like, the alignment too needs to really include all of us, all of us. So it's not about, if we bypass certain parts of our shadow and don't really get into and deal with all the parts of ourselves, well, we're not actually in alignment and things can go awry for us. And that's okay too. That's part of the journey. And that's what all of us do. I've certainly been there for many years of my life. But through this, what's really become clear is, it's a blessing right now. It's a gift that there's this really deepening mass awareness of the term shadow even in ourselves, right? All of our shadow parts of ourselves, and there's all these tools and modalities and people working with people doing shadow work to really bring forward alignment means let's love and accept all the parts of ourselves, even those parts that are difficult or hard or scary or shameful or deep in our depths that we don't want to talk about. We can't be fully aligned until we actually go there to some degree and love those parts of ourselves and bring them into the light to some degree and just allow them all to be there. And then that's actually true alignment.
Mm,
That's actually true alignment there until we get to all the parts of ourselves.
absolutely. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I have to ask because I keep using non-duality and oneness
Yeah,
interchangeably.
sure.
I have to ask, is non-duality, the idea of non-duality, a form of trying to explain God or define God or grasp the nature of God?
I love that. Thank you. Beautiful question. Yes, no, not really. And so God can mean many things for many people. So I'll just say right now, like when I hear you say the word God in this context, what I think of is there is an overarching, we can call it a supreme intelligence of the entire universe that accepts and loves and is the creator of all things and also is all things. And so, from a non-dual perspective, like again, like there can be God, and like I pray to gods and goddesses that are not me, knowing that they're also me, right? So, there is this eternal God is all things and is also not separate from us, which I want to fully acknowledge is not a part of every tradition's beliefs. And I want to honor those traditions that don't believe that, and that's okay as well. But for me, the closest we can get to God on earth is love. To me, like, because love is the fabric of all things. Love is this connection that we have, which is the glue and the conduit. When we say, like, I love another human, I love you, and we fall in love with somebody, from this perspective, what's really happening is that this person that we're seeing is opening us up to the light of the world because they see us so clearly and we see them and we open our hearts. And through this connection, what's really happening is we're opening up to the connection and the beauty of all the world. And we attach that idea maybe to a person. And that does happen through people because that's how we're made. But also, it can happen with the universe itself and with trees and all things. And we don't, as you said earlier, we don't have to attach the importance of that relationship in that way of wanting something from them specifically. Like we can love openly and say, yes, let's be in a relationship and I love you, but also I realize that this love is universal. And so really there's this, there's all kinds of love, and there's this idea of love that is just coming from our hearts, and it's like a joyous connection. We're walking outside on a beautiful day and we can just love the universe and everything in ourselves and everything. And it's this glowing presence. So I think love is as close as we can get, like true divine love is as close as we can get in this realm to this universal idea of God. And then and then simultaneously, as we deepen into non-duality, yeah, it's are we becoming more connected with God? Yes, because we're becoming more connected with all things. Um, so I'll just leave it at that. Like, yes, but also.
I understand that's a very difficult question to try to answer. And, it's one of those things, and kind of what we alluded to earlier, when it comes to s- understanding certain spiritual concepts, you can only try to use words to explain it to a certain extent before words start to fail you. So thank you for, giving it your best shot. And I think that was a good answer, but I also understand that was a there's a lot there, right? But I had to ask, right? Because people talk about this higher intelligence, you know, and interchangeably with oneness, right? And like you said, it's a yes and no answer, right? And trying to describe or figure out why it's a yes or no answer is a little bit more complicated, but I understand what you're putting down. So I kind of want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about a quote that you said, that you wrote, which is, "We are alchemists, catalysts of each other's awakening." So can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of what serves as a catalyst for many of our awakenings have to do with the interpersonal relationships that we have. Why is it important to recognize that?
I think especially in the West, where we are now at this time, we're in this place where, looking back, especially to the Eastern traditions, there are many traditions where they try to take away all those distractions of relationships in life and say, go to a monastery, pray all the time. There'll be people around you, but you don't interact with them very much, no relationships, and just pray, and then you'll have your connection to God. And I think that is one way. But from what I've been told in my experience, there's a lot of people who maybe enter those situations and then don't actually also find their true connection with all things, right? My first career was a biologist. I was a tropical ecologist studying birds and monkeys in the jungles of all over the world. And so I do believe absolutely in the universal creation of all things, but I also believe we are animals here on this earth and that there is evolution. And so, like, we're connected to all of the natural forces of the world, and we're communal tribal animals from one perspective. And we're made in this polarity to be together, to reflect things to each other. So I talk to trees every day and they talk to me. I'm looking out my window at the trees around me. But, the trees and I have different frequencies of energy because they're made differently. But you and I are the same. We're both humans. And so when I reflect energy to you and you reflect energy to me, I receive it in a much deeper, direct, and clear way. And we can even use words that we understand very clearly, understand what their meanings are. But even beyond the words, the energy that you and I reflect to each other is received and absorbed in ways that nothing else in the universe can reflect to us because we're the same. right? We have the same. And so we're made this way. What a gift to have other beings around us that can reflect our situation to us and give words and meaning to that and show us who we are through their love, but also through their frustration, through their admiration, but also through their anger, through their through all the ways that we can interact. What a gift. That's how it is. So, why is it that way? Well, because it's that way, but it is that way, right? And so, every moment that we're with another human, and whether it's one person, whoever it would be, we're being shown exactly who and what we are through the eyes of those around us. We're being shown. And, one of the things they say is if you want to really see how awake you are spiritually is go and spend time with your family. That's a paraphrase from Ram Dass. Go spend time with your family if you want to see really where you are on the spiritual path. Another perspective is, as you see more and more people around you that are more awake, more loving, more kind, more generous, in all the ways that you appreciate, well, that's also a reflection of the manifestation of your world and your heart and your growth as well. Like we can see others so much more clearly sometimes than we can see ourselves. And so when people around you are showing up with more compassion, more love, more kindness, well, that's a direct reflection of the work we've done individually, we've all done to grow ourselves and to be able to receive that level of interaction. And and even if we receive that, if we go to a time when we have some conflict, well, that's the gift of us showing, okay, what are these parts of myself, right? Conflict, anger, disagreements, fights. These are just showing us where we're still holding on to ideas about ourselves that might not be true, and or parts of ourselves that we're ashamed of or hidden or whatever it might be, parts of our shadow that we can do more work on. That's also a gift. That's also a gift. Oh, wow, I was really attached to this, and so I got angry and had to yell back or respond in some way or said something mean or whatever we all do. Oh, wow, that's showing me that I'm really attached to these ideas. Because if we're not attached, if we're healed, someone says something mean to us, perhaps in this example, and we're just like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. I still love you, and I'm going to go on my way, right? We're not going to have that reaction.
I wholeheartedly resonate with everything that you just said. And I got to a point in my journey where when I looked back at certain relationship dynamics, I really realized how much of a gift they were, even though they were riddled with a lot of strife. I was so happy that I had those experiences, which, it might sound funny to people because it's like, why would you be happy that you had such contentious relationships? And, they were rare. I usually have pretty good relationships in my life, but those relationships showed me so much about myself. I mean, they were tremendous mirrors for me. So I'm of the belief that we really are here to wake each other up. So I just, again, really resonate with everything that you said. Okay, so for those who are on their spiritual journeys, I want to ask you a specific question because you said something at the very beginning of the show that I wanted to touch on, but didn't really want to derail our conversation too much. But I think this is a great way to kind of bring it back full circle. You talked about, working with gurus at some point, right? Because you've been doing this work for 30 years, and granted, you were an exec in the food industry, but you have been somewhat on a spiritual path for most of your life, right? So I know that you said when you were working with gurus, for example, that didn't necessarily end well. So can you talk a little bit about
Happy to.
what it means to be on a spiritual journey and when we should lean into gurus versus when we shouldn't, and what we should be aware of?
So appreciate that question. Thank you. It's great. And I'm going to cut to the spoiler first, and then I'll back up. And I think that right now, my experience and the experience of so many others is that right now we're at this time of mass awakening where the energies are shifting. And we can say we're in the age of Aquarius, or in this new age of, from all the traditions across time, we're in this new transition to a new phase. And we're just beginning this right now. So we're just barely entering this new energy, but we're all feeling it. Those of us who are awake are all feeling it. And so my deep sense and my knowing what I'm being told from my spirit guides, my angels, all the beings I speak to in other realms as well, is that the need for those type of teachers, the need for a guru is over. That era is done. And there was a reason that system was put in place many generations ago, because there was this many thousand year period of darkness. And by darkness, I simply mean of less accessibility to spiritual truths and energy on the earth. there needed to be a system across many generations wherein those teachings and the power was passed down from teacher to student to keep those teachings alive and the transmission of energy of these energies alive across many thousands of years. Now we're in a time when actually there's this mass awakening where these energies are available for all of us. And so, like, when I work with people, I call myself a spiritual mentor specifically, and I want a really soft word, mentors, like we're almost a friend. We are like the people I work with are friends, like that I've just, and I love to say this, like, I'm someone that maybe just like hiked the path. I got up earlier and hiked the path a little further. And then I saw like there's a landslide, and I come back and I can just say, like, hey, up there's a landslide. Let's go this way. It's a little bit easier if we do this. And because I did it already. But it doesn't mean I'm different or special in any possible way from anybody. I'm not. I'm 100% not. I just have been doing it a little while, and then here I am on the path. And it's now our birthright for everyone to have a direct experience with truth. And so the first thing I tell people and recommend to people when they work with me is go out and connect with nature right now. The teachings of nature are so vibrant. And I encourage people to read books from every tradition possible, just to receive and see what resonates for them. I'm really grateful. I'm very grateful to the teachers I've had that have appeared in my life. And even, I had this guru who, after living with him and working with him and really supporting him for a number of years in all the ways that I did, there were all these allegations of sexual abuse and financial abuse. And then he like left the country, to sort of evade. And I was felt really betrayed. Many of my dear friends, and who I felt like family ended up being abused by him in various ways. Well, that's because, his ego, he had a lot of beautiful teachings and transmissions from his teachers that now I've received, but his ego was still attached and he still wanted to sort of use these relationships for his own personal gain. And that's true in so many traditions, right? That's true in so many traditions. These stories have come out. And so it took me a long time. Now that was, let's call it 20 years ago, that's gone by. And so now I've been able to separate the teacher from the teachings and say, like, I'm really grateful for all of that. And even the difficulties and the betrayal and the hardships I felt through that sort of fallout of that relationship has taught me, I think, to be a more compassionate, open, careful, and better teacher and mentor now to people because I know what it looks like I've experienced and know what it looks like to be with someone who abuses their power. And so having that really has deeply allowed me to go deep into my humility and deep into my caution around anything relating to those types of dynamics. I have a really deep filter for that. And when I've worked with other teachers since then, when they, teachers who have that kind of energy of ego still attached to that dynamic, I'm just like, no, thanks. I'm going to shy away from that. But for everyone going forward, I think there's a huge value in what's been passed down from generations past, right? And, I after that I had a Taoist teacher, and primarily the teachings that come through me are from this Taoist lineage, and I'm extremely grateful. There's a power to what, like we were saying, there's a power even from a teacher to a student. We can receive the teachings from everywhere, and yet when we receive them from a human teacher and pass them on to a student, they can receive them deeper because, again, we're human to human. And when it happens through generations, there's a transmission of that spiritual energy, which is eternal, comes through time. And because all time is now, there's a deepening of that spiritual energy through a teacher, through the transmission, because it happens through many people across time. It's all now. And so there's a bigger pool of it. And that's also not true, but it's a way to talk about this experience of like the energetic transmission of lineages, which I'm very grateful for. So going forward, for people, just know that the spiritual teachings are everywhere for everyone, and the books that come across your path, the people that speak to you in the line at the coffee shop, and whatever teachers might come your path, the teachings that come to you are what you need. The people who come to me or anyone else, like, but the people who come to me, I know their stories and the way that they sort of come across my teachings and when and where. It's very synchronous. Is that the right way to say it? And it's never quite random. It always feels like everyone is beautiful and special in a really deep way. And it just makes me smile even thinking about it, just how magnificent this universe is in all of its beautiful synchronicities and coincidences to meet us up in the ways that we do.
Absolutely. And I think some of the best mentors or spiritual mentors empower you in a way where you don't feel reliant on them. They kind of want you to
100%.
be in a space where you fully trust yourself and trust your connection with the divine or and really be able to cultivate that spiritual life and journey by yourself, without necessarily needing them, but they offer their services as guidance at the least. So this was a great conversation, Aaron. I feel like I could talk to you forever. We can go on because I think we just scratched the surface, barely scratched the surface when it comes to non-duality and spirituality and spiritual awakening and what that means. So thank you so much for this amazing conversation. I have to ask you, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Yeah, I recently had just about 3 weeks ago, I had a very serious ski accident, which was entirely my fault. I went off a really steep slope on a low snow day and I hit a rock. And I went flying down the slope and I bruised my back in a massive way, my back, my tailbone, where I'm just deeply grateful that I didn't die and deeply grateful that I'm not paralyzed. It was that close to transitioning from my current awareness. And so I've been in this period actually very recently of deep healing and introspection. And it wasn't quite a full near-death experience, but very close to it, where it just opened those doors, opened the veil. And for everyone, like what's come through is just like, we don't know how many breaths we have. We don't know how many days we have. We don't know. Like, tell everyone around you you love them, do all the things that you know in your heart you're meant to do. Take those brave steps. Like, I have people come to me every day and say, like, new people come to me and they're like, you might think I'm crazy, but I know I'm meant for more. And then they'll give their, I know I'm meant to do this in the world. And it's something and I'm like, no, you're not crazy. This is like, listen to those things. So for everyone listening, like, when you know you're meant for more, when there's this inkling of like, I really could like give all this up and realign myself to do this, like do it now. Like take those steps, be brave, be bold, be compassionate from your heart, be loving, be kind, forgive people, tell people you forgive them, have the hard conversations. Like let go of all the energy so that you're free because we don't know how long we have and every moment is such a deep gift. Such a deep gift.
Fantastic. I feel like God is talking to through you to me and to the rest of the audience because this is something that has been on my mind a lot, especially as it pertains to kind of taking life by the horns and listening to my intuitive guidance and releasing any sort of judgment or fear that I might have. Thank you so much for sharing that. Where can people find you if they want to connect with you or work with you?
Absolutely. So my Instagram and my website are both Natural Heart Alchemy. So Insta at Natural Heart Alchemy and my website, naturalheartalchemy.com. You can find everything there. And I look forward to connecting to whomever feels called to reach out.
Awesome. I'm going to link all of that in the show notes. Thank you again, Erin, for stopping by Shifting Dimensions.
Thank you so much.